know that you're involved in high school and in teaching, and I mean, sort of certainly from a psychological point of view, there's so much emphasis on the emotional environment being optimal for children to be able to learn. And I was wondering how you incorporate that in your own system where you are, and sort of what that looks like for you.
Okay, perfect. I can jump in there. I think, in terms of the most ideal environment for learning, like you said, Charles, is that environment that promotes those social and emotional skills, firstly, because you need those to learn, especially in a high school environment. You need, self-awareness, self-management, or to learn optimally, I guess. So an environment that promotes that is one that's firstly full of connection. I think that's the most important thing, is that, I think often in high school or the traditional school system, kids are just numbers, whereas in our system, they're individuals that have got unique strengths and areas of development and personalities and learning styles and interests that you need to know. And by knowing that about each student, we almost start off every year, assessing that. What are your interests? What are your strengths? What are your areas of development? What is your personality type? What is your learning style? And by knowing those students so well, that connection happens. So that's the first thing I think that's unique about our system, is that there's a connection on an individual level with each student. And then, we have something called advisory that we do every morning. And it's kind of like we use that time to connect. But at a high school level, it's also a lot of, discussing those social and emotional skills, or those what they call soft skills, looking at, what does our week look like this week? On a Monday, we start off all together. What does our week look like? What are our goals for this week? Academic goals as well as other goals. Let's set out and plan. I feel like actually beyond the academic skills, these students need these social and emotional skills and soft skills to be successful after school, whether it be university, whether it be running a business, whether it be even traveling. I suppose you need those communication skills, collaboration skills in all settings. So that's a big part of it. So advisory, spending that time sharing about how we're feeling, sharing news, and then working on a social and emotional skill. I think that's something we do differently at the Green School, in terms of developing the social and emotional skills, as well as a lot of self-reflection from the students. I think that's essential. They reflect on their abilities, their skills. They give me a lot of feedback. I give them a lot of feedback. I suppose the feedback, next, we've often spoken about that, as the most important thing. So those are some of the practices in terms of the social and emotional, but I can talk for days. So if you have any other questions, I can keep going.
Yeah. I imagine that children, some of these high school children, regulation or emotional intelligence skills.
Sorry, say that again, Charles, you just broke up a bit.
Yeah, I imagine that for some of these children that you teach, they arrive at the institution with poor skills in relation to emotional regulation and intelligence, and that this might initially be difficult for them, and that for those children the initial engagement with this might be quite superficial.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Sorry.
As I'm listening to you, I can imagine that as that environment becomes more secure, as they learn that it's safe to be able to talk about things like you're outlining here, that some changes start to happen as they start to feel more secure in this environment.
Definitely. I think that's our biggest challenge. So especially at a high school level, in order to deal with the academics that we are, giving the students or teaching the students, they need to have a good set of social and emotional skills already developed. And new students coming in, it's very tricky, because also the way we trained as educators is more of a guide. So we're expecting a lot of independence, from the ages of 14 up. We're expecting a level of independence that's maybe unique, especially in our country, I think, in terms of how we teach students and the general level or approach to education. But what's fascinating is a lot less to do with me, how they develop these skills, more with the community. Oh my gosh, sorry, my cat is stopping on me. It's got a lot more to do with the community of students. So they kind of, I don't know how to even explain it. They get absorbed into the community. They see other students doing it. They feel safe that they can see a student have that relationship with an adult that they've maybe never seen before. And we're very blessed in terms of the teenagers that we have and the high schools that we have, because they really encourage a positive engagement from all. They actually sometimes will even tell us if there is a negative sort of engagement or energy or dynamic, that this is not going to work, Miss Megan. This is not the right environment.
Wow.
And that's been explained to me before by one of my high schoolers. And they said, they feel like, they can observe and they can watch and they kind of encourage a positive, positive engagement with each other. And often if they do call people out on their negative behavior, if they're not, for example, I think they use the example of breaking something. They say, hey, we don't do that at the school. That's not what we do. They often that child will either just completely remove themselves or quickly, check themselves and, check the behavior next time. Yeah. So it's a lot more to do with that. And I think it also comes from the environment we have created for those students to be able to actually feel free to express that to other students. But it's a lot more to do with them actually watching their peers. And what also helps with that, Charles, I think, is that we have a mixed age group with our high schoolers. Obviously, we're small and, we have a mixed group. And having a few older students in the class with these younger students are brilliant role models. And it's beautiful what they learn from each other, whether it be academic or social and emotional. The conversations they have, we often in advisory talk about situations. So, example, social awareness was a topic that we discussed, and we'll look at scenarios or role play or discuss situations other students have been in. And just listening and having those conversations with each other also just promotes it massively. Yeah. But it is something that's much needed in our system. I think, Henix, that independence and that self-awareness, self-management.
Well, particularly in your class, you see there's all the students who take on role models, and then they're role models to younger students. And then at the same time, it gives these older students an opportunity to teach younger students. And we know there's no better way to learn than to teach. And often you'll see walking into your classroom that older or, students with particular skill set would reach out to assist each other, younger students, because they've been through the course or the program, and that gives them an opportunity to reinforce, and they're very quick to reach out, assist each other. So the collaboration almost just happens instinctively when you mix older and younger students together in a class.
It does. And like an example of that, Nix, is like we did our passion projects, and it's amazing how, like, I actually just sat back and listened to some of the feedback they're giving each other. So it was about running a business, and two of the high schoolers were talking about setting up this business. And it's amazing how they know each other, because then the advice was, but hang on, you need to remember, like, your approach isn't always the best approach. You need to go in a bit slower, explain it a little bit more this way. You're brilliant at it, but, focus on how you deliver the lesson, or how do you, deliver this business. It was just fascinating that they could give each other that feedback, and there was no hard feelings. Like, there was no it was no criticism or anything like that. They just took it so well. The other student was nodding and said, yes, I understand. I actually should be better. Try to do it this way. And yeah, that mixed age group, nowhere in the real world are we ever all set in our age. Every 30-year-old has to interact with only 30-year-olds, and I think the traditional school, the traditional school model, I mean, that's more just for a level of control. And then what that does as well, it gives you that glass ceiling of grades. Because you are 13, you should only know this amount, which is not how we learn, and it's not the truth about the brain.
Right. Wow, that's a very pertinent point. I imagine that for some of these students, this school environment might be the only place where they experience this level of safety or connection.
I think so. I mean, I think
that's quite remarkable that you actually have fostered an environment that can compensate for possibly sort of unoptimal home environments, or less optimal home environments, where they can actually come, feel that security, and actually almost find a place where they can be reparented. In the therapy relationship, you're obviously having clients come to you where they've come from less optimal environments, and sometimes it's only in that relationship, and well, it's only through that relationship of safety and security with their counselor or therapist that they can begin to create a secure attachment again, and then start to benefit from what comes from that attachment. And remarkable that you're kind of almost doing something similar as a school.
Yeah, I think we do it, but at the same time, for us, like that triangulation with parents is extremely important because of them being much younger. You know, making sure that we have families that understand the system, families that understand that the social and emotional aspect of a child is actually more important than academics. And also making sure we don't have families that just hand these children over for us to raise. So I think Nick and I have always been very careful with that, because we're there to meet the need as, or there to be responsible for these children within our educational capacity. I mean, it obviously comes with a lot more. I mean, we wear many hats, whether it be nurse and mom and, just general coaches. But there are certain students that it takes a little bit longer because maybe their family system hasn't, they don't have that secure connection or relationship. But families that students that do come from a family where they feel secure and loved, where their primary needs are met, they pick it up so quickly, and the academics, they just fly through. You often find the students that their cup's empty, because their primary needs aren't being met at home. That's where it becomes difficult, and a lot more effort from our side. But I think, that triangulation in this sort of system is super important. And just the willingness to learn, I think, from parents' side. Themselves also just some self-reflection. And it's difficult in today's society, to be honest, to find people like that.
I mean, it is suggested that the first rule of parenting is to figure yourself out or sort yourself out. And I guess when parents haven't done that, then that plays out with the kids at school. And I can imagine it also, the rule kind of also applies to teachers. That as a teacher, you're going to have the same kind of similar interactions as a parent has with a child. And the reason that parent has to sort themselves out is because children will trigger all of their own issues. And I imagine that for teachers, that is very much a reality, that children will trigger your issues. And if you do have unconscious sort of patterns going on in your life, that that they're going to come out in the classroom in unconscious ways.
Well, it just prohibits
I think that's
to connect. You're not able to
Exactly.
fully connect to the kids, and that's what they need to learn. They need that connection from their teacher, which we believe is so important. At the Green School, we feel like that connection to your teacher comes first. A child who feels securely connected to their primary caregivers, who we form as part of that base of primary caregivers, as teachers who spend 5 to 6 hours a day with them.
Yeah, I don't think we always fully see teachers as a primary caregiver.
Yeah, very much teaching the same kids too. And with our model, we often keep the same students for 2 to 3 years.
You are wholeheartedly invested in these children.
Right.
That's something unique about our system, I think, Max, because it's easy to pass along a group of students from one year to the next, just make it someone else's problem. But when you've got these students, when you got this model where you rotate with them, I think it means something. Their success, my success. It's a whole different level. But at the same time, like you said, it's that just you have to have that self-awareness, the ability to reflect and, watch those things that might trigger you as an educator, but it takes a lot of work. And I think that's the important thing, is being able to actually put that work in. Then it's a great job.
Yeah, I can imagine. Just on the whole, I mean, at your school particularly, how aware are teachers of these dynamics, attachments, how their own issues and self-awareness plays out in the classroom, and what do you do to help foster this awareness?
I think the biggest thing next would be feedback we give our teachers. We're really big on feedback and hard conversations and working through hard conversations, because you can imagine some of these topics would be hard. If you are an educator or someone that hasn't had training in psychology, like these might be triggers to have sort of conversations around connection points and reflecting. But it is something that we discuss as a staff body. We have these discussions quite often. And I do believe that, when Nick and I talk about training teachers, that there should be absolutely no educational training without psychology. Without firstly understanding yourself, but then also understanding students, because exactly there's like attachment theories, family systems, personality, social psychology, developmental psychology, especially that, everyone should have an awareness of that before you even start interacting with a child. So for me, if I had to actually completely rewrite education curriculum and training of educators, Nick and I discuss this often, it would include that. Go through that first yourself, learn it for the student, and I think that would make a huge difference, because it's something that's missing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's missing, or if it is treated, it's treated lightly, as though it's secondary to the academic theoretical side of it. Which in many respects completely overlooks the structure of the developing child's brain.
Yeah, completely.
The brain, we know that right brain development happens first and left brain development happens secondary to that. And right brain development is the nonverbal, emotional, somatic, relational development that children, that sort of fosters first or blossoms first. And that if that is not attended to or seen or responded to appropriately, then the other side doesn't actually develop appropriately, and you can't get a reasonable, coherent, cognitive pupil if you haven't attended to that. And our education system seems to have swapped that around. And it's placed all the emphasis on the one and very little on the other. And I think it might just be because it's so daunting to actually approach it from the right brain perspective.
Because it takes a relatively whole adult. It takes an adult who is willing to have done some work on themselves, who's willing to identify it, who's got a good sense of who they are, what they're, we don't have to be all 100% secure. You just have to have an understanding of what areas in my life do I need to heal, or what is it to become a little bit more vulnerable, to be a little bit more authentic. And every child, in order to develop that right side, simply needs a whole authentic adult role model in order to meet that right brain to right brain every single day and help it develop. And I think absolutely right, as educators, we are not getting enough training, or there's not enough awareness around that. And I think also parents take that so for granted. We've had so many parents who take for granted that your kid wants to come to school every single day. They're making academic progress, and they feel very close and safe with their teacher. They feel completely secure with their teacher. That takes so much work from a school community. A school works like we work tirelessly just to that dynamic of your child wants to come to school, which is a huge, because school's challenging and we're asking them to do really hard things. Like for a 7 or 8-year-old to be writing a personal narrative or an opinion piece, or researching nonfiction topics, or doing math problems every day, those are all way, above their ability often, and need to be scaffolded. And these are hard things to do. So for your child, firstly, to want to come to school, then for them to feel, really happy when they're at school, right through all those challenges, right through all those fails. Most of the time they're getting things wrong. They're still happy throughout it. And then to feel close and connected to their teacher, like that dynamic.
It's very carefully crafted.
Very carefully crafted.
Yeah.
That's why that triangulation is so important as well, because you want the parents to, the parents and educators need to be on the same team.
Yeah.
I think often in today's society, just hearing from other colleagues, it's like parents versus the school, or parents versus the teacher, whereas we need to all be on the same page, and we all need to have an understanding that we all want what's best for the student. I think Nix and I even spoke about it this morning, Nix, that age restriction thing. Like, we find that, parents, that's something they completely overlook. And I was doing a professional development course on, child law and ethics. And they were actually saying it is illegal for students to be, watching things above their age, or playing games. Illegal. And parents still allow this, and they disagree with us as this concept. And, the social and emotional issues that come from that, manifest at school. And that's something I think that triangulation of parents and that consistently or continuously communicating and educating parents on that, because it's so hard if we putting in all that social and emotional work at school and it gets undone at home, and vice versa, depending what system you're in. So that's something I find, making sure we're all on the same page in terms of the child's social and emotional development.
Wow, that's really powerful, that idea of working together in that way with those objectives and with that broader context and understanding. It's a rare thing, I think, to find that a school system that allows that type of collaboration between teachers and parents with that primary objective in mind of the child's social, emotional health. It's very rare. I doubt there's a handful of schools across our country that get that absolutely critical element of education right.
Yeah, that just the child's social and emotional well-being.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And another thing I found is that as a community, sometimes when our kids are mixing together every single day, my parenting is only as effective as the parents of the kids my children socialize with.
That's interesting.
I also am very particular about the community that we have at our school, because I know that if you're, as a parent, are allowing your child to play Grand Theft Auto at 7 years old, which is an 18 age restricted game.
Yes.
My child's going to be exposed to what Grand Theft Auto has. And you're undoing my really careful parenting at home. And that's frustrating in a community when you're trying really hard to restrict and to monitor and to protect your children from what's out there. And then there's parents who aren't. And so we're finding that if as a community we're all on the same page, our kids are much.
I don't think parents fully understand how damaging it is to expose a young mind, a developing mind, to age inappropriate stimulus and content. This is a child that's learning to understand their mind and the mind of others, and it's a very tentative, a very sensitive process. The child is essentially the primary consideration in those early years for the child. The primary interest of the child in other people is to learn about themselves. That's primarily what drives them to be interested in others. They form their identity, their core, through the reflected appraisal from others, and that is, that's got to be that mirror is got to be clean, and it's got to be able to reflect the right things back to them. It's got to be able to teach them that when they're they have no idea what these sensations and experiences are that they're having in their body. And the caregiver and the mirror that reflecting back to them is helping them to understand who they are and what they're experiencing. And that's important for their happy experiences. It's critical for their negative experiences, that they can learn that these experiences are tolerable, that they're and that they can sort of
work through
manage, that they can manage them, that they're not overwhelming.
Exactly.
But some of these influences they're exposed to don't allow them to have that type of reflective experience. And it distorts thoughts.
Yeah. And if they do, like if I'm just thinking of the teenagers or high schoolers with social media, or even students younger, that mirror is often someone their age or someone that is not a whole adult.
Yeah.
You know, especially
Right.
when you come into you know, you are trying to develop your identity, and it's becoming more about how many people like the photo of yourself, or
Right.
I can pose like this and I get more likes, and that's becoming
Right.
a major issue. It's the mirror, or the people that are actually getting the feedback, you know, it is not appropriate feedback, and it's a seeking of
Right.
something that's in the wrong place.
Right. That idea of a developing mind that's very sensitive to the type of reflection is actually something I hadn't quite thought through before. One doesn't always see it that way. One thinks, what one tends to see it maybe purely through the lens of a moral guide, or, you know, kids learning about what a normal world looks like. But it appears that the most critical function is what it's actually reflecting to them about themselves, and the type of language and second order representations, symbolic representations that they're making about themselves.
Well, I often say to teachers that our job is to give students a language that they don't quite have yet about themselves.
Right.
So if you're noticing, and we call it, I call it naming and noticing and naming.
Right.
And if you notice a child really enjoys construction, they're always at the construction, they're always building something new out of it, they're tinkering, they're into Lego. And I said to them, give them the language. I notice that you're a natural engineer. You're always building something new. That child hasn't got the language that I'm an engineer until a model or an adult who is interested, an adult caregiver, gives them that narrative.
Yes. Yes.
I noticed you're a really good friend, because when kids leave their lunch at home, you're the first person who offers to share. I noticed that you're really empathetic. When someone's hurt, you're the first person there. That language a child does not have about themselves until there is an interested and invested caregiver who notices, names, and gives them the language about themselves. And I think what's really important is that the caregivers that are around our children give them accurate descriptions and help them form these identities.
Yeah.
Beginning of that self-awareness, you know, they can start saying, I'm good at this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what reminded me when you said that adults are a mirror for these children. That's the sort of mirror that we're training our teachers to be. Give name, notice and name. Give students the language. Give your children the language that develops a sense of self and a really secure and accurate sense of themselves. You did a good job.
Yeah.
That's feedback. You like to use the color blue.
Yeah.
Use the color blue every single day. I notice you use the color blue. Is that your favorite color? You know, notice and name it. Give it and specifics. Your feedback, daily feedback is the greatest teacher for children. That's the only way they learn, is through daily feedback, but it's also the formation of a sense of self in each of these children.
Yeah. And it's a sense of self because someone else is showing a concerted interest in them and their internal world. And that's the other problem with, you know, the games that you mentioned earlier, Grand Theft Auto, and as well as just a teacher who doesn't do this, is that, you know, there's this famous set of experiments run in the 60s called the still face experiment, where the infant is presented with a still face at about 6 months. And the child initially protests, and then they go into a kind of tantrum, and eventually they actually start to lose function, bodily and mental function, in the face of the still face. The still face is just a caregiver just shows no expression as they're looking at them. You know, there's this breakdown of the child because it's so important that they get this contingent, reflective, appropriate response from the caregiver, because it's so important for that child to actually have that feedback as an integral part of their sense of themselves.
Right.
And if they are sitting in front of the screen all day, or they're with a teacher who can't give them that reflective functioning, then there's that breakdown, that dissolving of the internal experience, and there's no core solid sense of self can be developed. But part of those experiments, they would have an infant and a caregiver playing in a room, and then they would give a newspaper to the caregiver, and the infant would immediately approach the caregiver and want the newspaper taken away.
Yeah.
They want it removed because they just need that that engagement.
They've actually done one recently again that I saw. Same thing, had the caregiver and the baby, maybe about 9 months old, in the room with a psychologist, and they were having a conversation, engaging, playing with the baby, and then they actually brought in a third individual that came in on their cell phone and just sat there on their cell phone. Okay. And from being a relaxed individual, like a little baby that's playing very casually with a toy, their awareness went straight to that individual that wasn't engaging with them. And you could see the whole demeanor of the entire environment changed for that baby. And it was even worse then also if the demeanor of the individual that came with the cell phone was slightly aggressive. The body language was a little bit more rigid, would make like one comment to the caregiver or the other psychologist in the room. You could see this child's trying to engage and understand what is going on. And, and I think, that comes right back then also, once again, to that parent engagement, which is so important. I often joke and I say, I think there should be a parenting course before you even have children. And then it should be upgraded every 5 years or every 3 years. It's different for every age group. But I mean,
PPD
the
points.
basic PPD points, exactly. We have to do it. But
it should be a prerequisite, shouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's something I just might be a bit off topic, but just thinking about next with the high school or at our school in general. Like there's a big movement currently with no cell phones at school. So I think, like I said, Albans has started it here, but in the UK and the US, they're rewriting policies. And I think it's very beneficial not to have the cell phone, even though we've got a blended learning approach in our classroom where they've got devices and we're learning through a blended approach. The cell phone issue is massive. Like someone explained it as if having your TV, back in the day, having your TV, having your hi-fi or record player or whatever it was, and your home phone and a camera and a calculator all on your desk at the same time, then still expected to work.
Exactly. Yes,
Yeah, but what's interesting is that I actually had this conversation with my students the other day. So we put our phones away in the morning, and then we carry on with our day. No one's allowed their phones, so there's no distraction, because if you get buzzed,
it has a box when you walk into the classroom. You have to put it in the box.
Yeah, and that's it. From 8 until 2, there's no cell phone unless you've asked me and you need to contact a parent for lunch or your tackies or whatever it may be. But what was an interesting observation is at the end, some of the kids actually find that it's a relief. They don't have to stay connected all this time. But what's also been interesting for me is to notice the parents. The biggest distraction, person that's messaging them the most is their parents throughout the entire day. And that for me, I just found interesting in terms of, there's something there, just in terms of our society, our connection to our phones. I think something that, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting topic now.
I love that the kids say it's a relief that they don't have to be on call for those times. Nobody's expecting, and they have a reason. Like I was at school, I can just focus on school. It's almost giving them, it's protecting our kids against, one more invasion into their time to learn.
100%.
And I think what it's also happened, it's saying is incredible, is that because our kids have no phones at school and no devices at break times, they play.
Yeah.
Right.
We've gone into schools where teenagers sit on their phones all break. They don't even talk to each other.
Wow.
And at the Green School, 17-year-olds and 12-year-olds are playing 1, 2, 3 block.
Yeah.
And building bow and arrows and climbing trees.
Yeah.
And that for social development has been massive. If I just think about the conversations, or even to just watch kids play, like what you observe as an educator, like we've at least given ourselves that opportunity, because yes, I've been to high schools recently where you look out the window at break and everyone's on their cell phones, or they're allowed in the computer lab to play games, and that social interaction is completely gone. But you can learn so much by just watching them play and engage, and it's it's always fascinating for me.
and it really does speak to the safety that you create at that school. Because one of the first things to go when safety goes is the child's desire to play.
Right.
It will immediately, it will be the first thing out of the door. So the fact that you can create an environment where children play really speaks to the safety that they feel there.
Yeah. Yeah, play is such an expression of their inner world and a chance for them. And they just play and play. I mean, I walked up to the sandpit the other day and there was a group of 12-year-olds in the sandpit building castles.
Wow.
Where else do 12-year-olds build sandcastles in the middle of...
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the other beautiful thing about a secure attachment is not only the negative effects that it prevents, but also the positive effect of a child who's actually able to access their inner world, a rich inner world, including the creative, kind of intuitive and entrepreneurial part of that world.
Yes.
That wouldn't be accessible in an environment where they don't feel safe enough, where they don't feel secure enough, and where those skills of adults who can reflect back to them that internal world even exists,
right,
you know, is there. So then you have children who actually be able to access these really unique, beautiful, creative parts of themselves, which at the end of the day must be the focus of an education.
100%.
We passed the days of an education being someone who can learn a textbook and then sort of spew it out at some kind of exam in a memorized form. We know that's not education. And this is true education. And I mean, it's what it's what makes the world go round is this type of access to your inner world. So
I mean, we need that. That
12
is
years playing like that. 12-year-olds playing like that is testament to doing that right.
And for our sort of curriculum and education, you need that, because at the end of the day, it's application of knowledge. It's not regurgitation of knowledge. You need to come up with your unique idea. At the end of this unit, for example, English unit, you are coming up with your own story. We've looked at authors. We're modeling off of them now, but it's your own unique story. And so many students struggle with that because they haven't had access to the inner world. Traditional school systems do not allow it at all. There's no time to think about what you like or even play at break, as I've said. But we need kids to come and actually think and bring creativity and ideas. I mean, exactly, Charles, that's what makes the world go round. That's what brings innovation, inventions. At the end of the day, it's not, we no longer need these factory workers that traditional schools are producing. We need some creative thinkers, some problem solvers, some researchers, independent thinkers. I think there's not many independent thinkers in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it means being able to access all of your internal world, and including the negative, hard, stressful, sad, shameful parts.
Yeah.
That you have an environment where that's okay and it's acceptable to be able to go there, because as Brene Brown says, when you cut off the bad parts, you also cut off the good parts. So to have a school where kids can feel safe to actually be themselves in that way is quite remarkable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So another thing that allows for this is differentiation. And differentiation is such an important part of that sense of self, because the child needs to be able to identify exactly where they're at, what their strengths are, what their areas of development, and then know that a teacher recognizes that too and can work with them. And so that feeling of success coming to school every day is a large factor in that, is the fact that the child feels successful. So the child feeling successful every day, and we're trying to move away from traditional learning and we're moving in a direction of mastery learning, which mastery means that regardless of their age or their grade, we're going to master concepts at 100% before moving on to new concepts, which results in keeping kids still with their peer groups, never holding a child back, keeping them with their same peer group throughout,
Mm.
but working with them on their independent reading, phonics, maths, writing stage. And
Yeah.
and it's interesting because I've been reading the Steve Jobs book, Steve Jobs biography, and he spoke about what a struggle it was going to schools that could not differentiate for him. And
Sure.
him and Wozniak, who was his partner in Apple, both, I've just started the first couple of chapters, and it starts off with their early years in school. Both really struggled through school due to their teachers' inability to differentiate. And they got so frustrated in the schooling system that they started acting out. And one of the ways they would act out is they would create pranks and tricks at school. And Wozniak's favorite thing to do was to create bombs, look-alike bombs that that had timers that got quicker and quicker. And at one stage, he actually had the principal of his school grab this bomb that was going to go off and run out into the middle of the field with it against his chest to try and save all the children at his school.
Oh my word.
And the only way they could get Wozniak to stop doing this after they expelled him from a few schools and he kept doing it was to eventually send him to prison, or what
Wow, juvenile
detention for a couple of days. And they say even in juvenile detention, he taught the other children to wire their fans to the bars so that when security guards came, they'd get electrocuted and opened up for them. So they didn't know what to do with Wozniak because they had no ability to extend him. And their next suggestion for both Jobs and Wozniak was to skip them 2 grade levels. Skip them up 2 grade levels. Jobs said it was such a shock for him. That to be all of a sudden with 2 kids 2 years older and totally, he had a group of friends. He really enjoyed going to school.
Wow.
And they all of a sudden stuck him in an age group with kids 2 years older than him. And he said he hardly ever recovered socially from that because they're at such a different, this whole group.
Mental level.
And he was in a 14-year-old age group with all these 14-year-olds and no one his age.
Yeah. And that's purely because he was in a system where it was too rigid to allow for the flexibility of having a child differentiated at their level but stay with the same peer group, even if that might be a different level than his peers academically. The system's too rigid. When you're 16, you have to be at this level, and when you're 14, you have to be at this level.
Like the last ceiling grades, And I think next, like with the differentiation, I mean, in today's world, it's so easy to do that, and discussed a little bit earlier on, but blended learning, that blended learning approach where basically you've got a present and a past teacher in the classroom, and we can use technology and devices to record ourselves or have external international teachers come in and teach, so that children can move at their own pace. There's this, I did the course with UJ, the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and it was obviously more aimed at the further education and training area. But they were saying like the ideal classroom, and research has shown that it is a blended learning classroom, where that you can use technology to differentiate the instruction for students and let them move at their own pace. But then they've got that social setting where they can practice all those social skills. So that blended learning is so important for differentiation. I mean, we can, in a maths session, we could probably have about 5 to 6 or even more lessons going on different concepts because we've taken advantage of the technology that's out there. And let students, it helps so much in terms of not only just like their learning styles, it's their, confidence to, they can watch something over and over again, and they have you to guide them too. It's just a much better approach, that blended learning. And for high school, it's just takes off. I mean, we got students that are, so I would say that they're like 3rd-year students or even higher. I mean, maybe honors year students. They can have a schedule, they have a checklist, they manage their time, they know what they need to get through, they get it done. I've almost taught myself out of a job because they're just so independent.
Wow, that's amazing. It speaks so much to some of the critical factors around what secure attachment looks like. There's a need for safety and security. But then there's this critical need a child has to be seen. And I think when you chuck a bunch of kids in one class and 5% of them actually are contingent with what's actually going on and the rest fall out on either side, those feel like they're not being seen. you know, there's this is such a, and it's such a critical part of the child's development, is to feel that who they are and what they feel and what their particular preferences and talents are recognized and seen, and that's really is, you know, yeah,
So
wonderful that you can do that.
What's amazing is that in Megan's classroom, in our high school right now, is that until that child, you know, actually gets the face-to-face, she's got a pre-recorded lesson that Megan's made for her to watch the concept, and she can rewatch it a few times. Let's say in a math lesson, Megan will demonstrate a math concept, and she's got that saved on her device that she can watch over and over. She needs help with an assignment she's doing. She's also got an online teacher that she can reach out to for feedback, as well as Excel or Khan Academy, which is another teacher in the classroom, as well as Megan, who might be with a different group at the time, but will get to her as the stations rotate, so that she knows, like, I've got my time slot, I've got a one-on-one session, I'm going to, but until then, I've got all these other tools that I can use. And as that model works in every area. So it's an incredible way to differentiate for our kids. We do not have to be standing up teaching the same lesson to all the kids at the same time. And then kids don't have to be held back or pushed ahead of what they feel comfortable with. Because we know when you push kids too far, they get anxious. And when you obviously don't extend them enough, like my story was, they get bored. And they start making trouble. And this way, we want to make sure kids are just on their just right level all the time. And that's what makes kids want to come to school every day, because they know, firstly, I've been seen. I feel successful in what I'm working on. Every child feels successful. Yeah,
I've been seen, and it's validated, and it's seen as important. And I imagine that with that sense, the child can actually get fully in touch with what their passions are.
Right.
And that can then emerge in a child who graduates knowing what they want to be or do, or what kind of vocation they'd like to pursue, because this is, because they've had this privilege of being seen.
Without too much shame. That's a big part of it for me, is that often in areas of school where we didn't do well, there was a lot of shame associated with it. You know, and there was a lot of comparison to the kids in our class and how we did in comparison to the other kids in your class, instead of just in comparison to yourself. This is where I'm at. It's okay. I'm going to set goals. I can work on it at my own pace without being compared to my peers right now. I have strengths in other areas, because let me tell you, every one of those kids right now, our high school kids, have got a very specific set of skills, and we recognize them and we can communicate to them, and they're okay with it, because they feel like, you know what, maybe I'm a mathematician. I'm going to get through high school maths because I have a teacher who's invested in me, and I'm going to work at it in my pace. And I might not move as quickly as the kids around me, but that's okay. But have you seen my fiction writing? It's incredible. You know, that's my.
And I think that the biggest thing that comes also from this, which I also feel like is lacking in society in general, is intrinsic motivation. You know, our students are so intrinsically motivated because they are seen, they are heard. People, they know where they're at. They got that self-awareness. And I feel for high schoolers, that is essential. You know, if you set in your own goals, you're reaching your own goals, you got adults around you to support you reaching those goals, and you see yourself reach those goals, and you reap the rewards of that. Then intrinsic motivation, that's all you need. If you've got that internal intrinsic motivation and you know what you're passionate and interested about, and you're going to find a way. You know, you're going to find a purpose, and you're going to be a contributing member of society. And I think that is the end goal towards our school, is by the time you leave, you've got a skills and you've got a very clear idea of who you are and what you're passionate about, and you can go pursue that. I think all three of us here are very passionate about our career path, and it makes a huge difference in your lifestyle and your life satisfaction. Are pursuing something you're passionate and interested in. And so many students, I mean, I do career counseling, a lot of students, and it's hard, 18-year-old, and they have no of what they might be interested in, not even about themselves yet, but what they might be interested in. And it becomes very overwhelming then to choose a career, because now's the time, and you go into university, and it becomes a very overwhelming, anxious process, where it should be actually an exciting process. I'm taking the next step.
You know, with clients, you don't teach them so much to get in touch with their emotions and their internal needs and preferences as you unblock them, because when we're born with the capacity to recognize and be aware and articulate what our internal world is. But we have situations where, because of just to survive, we sometimes have to block it out.
Can imagine.
And I think, you know, the same with that learning environment. It's not that you're teaching them what to be or what preferences or what careers. You're unblocking what could possibly prevent them from getting in touch with that. You're taking away the obstacles.
Yeah.
And you just take away the obstacles from that child, they will naturally find it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. As what is that? Sir Ken Robertson. Yes. What does he say? Schools kill creativity, and I think if you don't kill creativity, you know, as soon as creativity is killed, that's a huge block in your inner world. And I think that's the end goal, like that creativity and problem solving. I think, you know, the first thing with any child or working with any child is do no harm. That's the first.
Right.
I mean, even as any health professional, educators, do no harm. I mean, and if you are going to block a student, you know, as far as I'm concerned, in any sort of psychological way, that is doing harm. And I think that is essential to keep in mind as an educator. It comes all the way back to what we said already, like work on yourself and make sure that you're not putting any obstacles in that child's way. You know, you're not giving them a narrative where, I'm terrible at maths. I'm not a good writer. It's the opposite. You highlighting their strengths, supporting them with their development.
Right. Well, good. I think we've got some good information today. I might want to just use this bit to introduce the video for myself. Anyway, you guys might use it differently, but I'm interviewing Megan and Nicole today from the Green School, who are educators and owners of the school, and going to be just talking about their experiences as educators.